Hi there, good afternoon. Holding this webinar this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, those that have already. We've got quite a good audience today, so we're just going to give it a couple of minutes waiting for a few other people to join us. Rather grandly, we called this the post-pandemic fallout business debt crisis, and we're going to start at 3 o'clock dead, so we've got a minute or so to go, so we'll see how that pans out. What we're doing here, we're giving an insight as to what we're finding is happening out in the business world today, particularly those that start to struggle. We've worked on the premise of what Luke Johnson said, the guy that has made his primary fortune from Pizza Express and insurance scenarios, used to write extensively for the Sunday Times, and he talked about, he's had a lot to say during the pandemic and business and how it's been let down and like, but as he said at the time, businesses prior to the pandemic that had pre-existing conditions would fail, and unfortunately a lot of good businessmen and women have unfortunately failed as well on the back of it through not necessarily any fault of their own. So it's an unfortunate time. We're just in that, we're on that cusp at the minute in terms of where it is going to go. There are still a lot of unknowns. We're just going to keep adding the bits of content that we're aware of, and part of this webinar process is to share what we do. If people do want to contact us on the back of this webinar, we'll gladly entertain them and chat away. If they want us to go further, obviously we've got to talk candy, but as is, the webinar is here on a content and informational basis. So we're on 3 o'clock there, so we'll get going. So that's us, Bell & Company. We're debt strategists and been going here in Belfast for about 10 years now. So I think we nearly know what we're talking about in most instances. We definitely don't know everything. We learn every day, and in today's world, that's the way that has to be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give you a quick, I use PowerPoint purely for me as a prompt, and sometimes it's handy enough to be able to return to as well. So in terms of what we're going to cover here today, we're going to give you a little bit of reason why we're giving this commentary. We're talking post-pandemic and where we see things going, and literally, I think it was the end of last week, they started taking inflation seriously, and/or interest rate rises have got to happen. Fairly relative, not too bad at the minute, but it's disappointing the way people are reacting to inflation. It's coming. If we're going to do something about it, do something about it. There are many components coming to that, so they need to keep an eye on it. SMEs generally, we're finding it's very strange times for certain industries. We talk about the pent-up fury, as we call it, in terms of litigation and what people could do if they wanted to try and resort to litigation or whatever to make sure people paid. That's always been quite frustrating for a while for those particular industries. We'll delve slightly into where the HMRC, our experiences, followed on with a bit about the Finance Act 2020. Pretty short on that, not overly technical, but it's things that we're keeping an eye on and we're relaying to you. Same to a degree on SIGA. I always think that the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act is quite a gobful, so we call it SIGA. And then we've got the old hairy chestnut of Sibbles and Bibbles to repay. A couple of stats in there as well, which, well, it's not necessarily interesting to the outsider. It's very important that we keep abreast of what is going on there, because that's going to change materially as we go on. So we'll give you a bit of reason why we feel that we should comment on this. Again, we don't know everything by any stretch, but what we're finding, about 100, we're getting at least 100 inquiries every month from SME owners at the moment. And I think that is a bit of a lull before the storm. I slightly worry about quarter one and quarter two of next year in terms of the pressure starting to really come on. As a business, we have across the board, including our two brands, they're three brands, we have 350 clients. On our setup in the last 10 years, we've saved about 144 million. And just this week saw a deal in the Republic there where we settled on 414,000 euro at 25,000. So we're sort of cutting edge. It's not an advert. It's given us almost like our raison d'etre. That's why we're here and what we do. It's very important, obviously, for us to keep abreast of all changes and trends, and we're trying to share that here. This isn't advice, by the way. You have to always put that precursor in it. It's what we think, how things are going, and we try and keep slightly ahead of the curveball there. In terms of what we do for clients, we bring reality and commerciality, and we're trying to share that in our content. That's very important. We get that. And reality and commerciality is so important. you have to be technically astute. Certain people have to be able to do certain things. Solicitors have to be able to analyse a lease. Barristers have to prepare cases for writs. Accountants have to do forensics and everything else. But our job is to keep that commerciality there, and I say we're going to share that by way of content. We're going to talk a little bit about SMEs generally at the minute, and what we're finding in the last since Q3, since about July, it's been pretty nervous out there, and there's a lot of unknown, and my old bugbear of mainstream media doesn't help. I was listening to somebody the other day by Tony Robbins, and he said obviously good news doesn't sell, bad news does, but at the minute they're in overdrive. The world is seriously crap according to mainstream media. There is no good news whatsoever, and I think it's starting to take its toll on us as a population. This isn't psychobabble, and it's not. I'm not preaching anyway here. But when you day in day out, if you start with the news in the morning, finish the news at night, there would have been no good news. Not one story, apart from a puppy may have got saved from a river or whatever. Okay, so it's. I think it's undermining where we are. There's a lot of unknowns out there, and they're labouring on them all. And it's, social media is not responsible, but people are responsible, but they're using it, and they're just it's not good. So what we're trying to do here as well is, if anybody wants to share anything that I have here, for instance, we're talking here, nobody knows how Sybil's and Bibbles are going to map out for those businesses that can't afford them. So we'll talk briefly on that when we come to one of the last slides here on Sybil's and Bibbles. But anything that people want to share, I suggest they do. We all need to know this rather than being hit with what's going to happen, because I'd suggest Rishi and a few of his guys in the the Department of Finance in London, the Exchequer, know what's going to happen. And I say we're doing it on the basis, yeah, cool, we want to put our profile out there, but we're sharing what we know and what we're finding. And I think that's very important, so that everybody gets that chance to understand our perspective, and likewise we search high and low for other people's perspective and thoughts on how things are. So again, going back to my favourite or my pet hate, post-pandemic despite the MSM, right? The world is in a good place generally. We've printed immense amounts of money, and it's bringing its own problems in terms of inflation. And forever it will be. It's basic economics, a lot of money in the system. Some people might disagree and say, well, I'm not seeing any, but there's a lot out there. And there's any number of finance platforms and availability. Consumer demand is through the roof. That's why we get the apparent supply chain crisis. Everything's a crisis nowadays. So what I do quite extensively is follow what's going on in America in every sense. So the Americans are always first, and they've been talking about post-pandemic for 6 months or so. Whereas at the minute, we're deciding that, numbers are up, numbers are down, whatever. The Americans get on with it, and it's they have their failings, our American friends, but in this sense, they're very, very forward-thinking. And I think it's very important that as businessmen and women, we break those shackles as well in terms of what our dear mainstream media are telling us. Then obviously we've got stats flying around for everything, number of cases, number of deaths and everything else. There's a professor, I've forgotten his surname, do excuse me, but he is saying that basically 80% of people that are catching COVID and or dying, unfortunately aren't vaccinated. We as businessmen and women can't live our life like that, and nor can the general population. So the government will never announce those figures, and this isn't a political statement, so you get the damn lies and statistics. So we have that backdrop to work with. And as I said, good news doesn't sell. We're at a place where we are post-pandemic, and Rishi has done all he can. Now the taps are going to be turned off. The pressure is going to come on as we revert to real, with reality, if you like, back to almost late 2019. And because of that comes back payback time with whatever debt business have accumulated and or added to, when you've got the ability to take Sybil's and Bibbles loans, furlough, and any other support you can get, say, from the local council and the like. What we're finding, the main challenge we're finding, if there are multiple creditors, is looking at the differing creditor needs. In a minute, we're going to talk a little bit about the HMRC, and they've been pretty civil so far. And Rishi sort of told them all to calm down, don't go kicking indoors yet, but we can start to see a little change there as well, along with the business rates and the like. Sibbles and bibbles, I think, will take 4 or 5 years minimum to pan out, and there's some stats at the end here in terms of how many were given and the value. And then what we're finding is particularly sort of antsy brigade are the peer-to-peer platforms, because some of them aren't great. They've pumped a lot of money out there with not a lot of due diligence, and consequently they get a little bit aggressive in terms of what they do. And very often it's not necessarily about the investor or the creditor. In some instances, and we've seen a few of these go to the wall, it's about their survival, literally their survival. So it's, and we're dealing with a couple of peer-to-peers in receivership, and they're messy. So there's a heady mix, which I referred to in previous webinars, but now I'm working on the basis that we're through this pandemic. Yep, got to keep an eye on it. Touch wood, there are no other strains, and we get all the boosters and everything else that we need. But materially, we're working on the basis that it's over. This in turn becomes a challenge. It's almost like day one of the new businesses, thus the challenge, as I say, there for SMEs. So going through it, the post-pandemic, different creditor needs, cut out the BS and the white noise from out there in the world. Businessmen and women have got to get on with things now, and that's the challenges. So SMEs, generally, as the courts start to open, we quite sadly, we review the insolvency stats, and we've reverted back to the usual suspects that I've said there. Typically, the highest number percentages are construction, hospitality, and telecommunications. Telecommunications is, there's any number of phone shops and the like in existence. And this last quarter stats, which I think came out at the end of October for quarter 3, we're giving that trend again. The one I'm going to slightly predict here is I fear quarter 1 and quarter 2, because at the moment businesses don't have enough fat on them. They are, this time is usually fill your boots up, grab a bit of cash. It's a quiet quarter 1, and then you've got to go on the basis that we should be able to cover our bills, our VAT, da-di-da-di-da, waiting for Easter, and off we go, particularly in hospitality. This year there is no fat. People are just, they've gone through the various lockdowns. Hopefully they've got through and survived, but they're spent. They may well have taken their bibbles or sibbles and had to use those to survive and coming through. And then consequently, I can't see some of them having enough fat on them to go into the new year. Plus, you've got almost like the perfect storm of there's more and more litigation coming into the system, and people want to get on with things. So it's going to be quite a brutal period, I think. And it gives me no joy to say it, despite it's what we do. So it's we're just reporting our findings. Other industries are suddenly coming into the radar, and in a weird way, car dealerships, especially second-hand car dealerships, is one of the few industries that's genuinely suffering with a supply chain crisis. Again, our mates at the mainstream media, supply chain this, we might not have enough turkey for Christmas, heaven forbid, that toy might not be on the shelf. But in the real world, obviously, not going too technical, cars are run by silicon chips. There's a shortage of those in the world, and that's filtering down right the way through the system, to the extent the second-hand cars are increasing in value, and car dealerships are struggling to find out how this is going to settle. We have instances where a 10 grand car is now a 12 grand car, but the fact that it's gone up 2,000 means that person that may sell at 12,000 won't, because they can't get back into the market. And it's these nuances that we're finding, and it's quite surprising every now and again you come across a successful, or what would appear to be a successful business, but is suffering because one reason or another taken out of their hands. We helped a company there that supplied food to airlines and managed to survive right the way through, but then the airline changed completely their policy. So they thought, that's okay, we get through lockdown. When they got through it, the airline changed their approach in terms of their onboard food, and that was the death knell for that company. As I say, it mentioned supply chain there briefly because I don't want to get too hung up on it. There are issues, we know that, but nobody's going to starve. Hopefully nobody's going to freeze. Johnny may not get the present he wants, but life will go on. We've never had so much choice in all our lives, and suddenly if we can't get the right type of rocket for our salad, there's a shortage. All of this manifests itself, in my opinion, in terms of it's hitting the customer confidence. And as we say, that's fragile. And it's being worked on by the media, and it's not good for business because it just isn't. People are sitting on their cash, and that's exemplified. Quite a bit of cash was accrued and saved during the lockdowns, and that some of it has come back, and you've just seen some of the graphs. We had the great big pitch in the graph, and we're struggling to get it back to 2019 levels, and that's it's only a few percentage points, but that's a lot of businesses. And now we've got the backdrop of courts and everything else opening, which is what we're going to talk about on the next slide here. And that is, people are coming, there is no place to hide now. We've been able to, a number of clients have sort of hidden in terms of what we do. Shh, be quiet, they don't know we're here. We've seen that particularly with foreign property owners that we deal with. All the banks are basically hidden as well in Spain, Cyprus, wherever. Suddenly they're all coming out the woodwork, suddenly getting loan sales, and everything's gearing up. So again, this isn't a negative presentation, it's what our experiences are and we're sharing them. So they're coming, and there's pent-up fury. There is pent-up fury because the courts have been completely frozen across the board, and here in Northern Ireland it's just on complete hold still. We're not going anywhere fast, and there's a lot of demand to get into the courts because a lot of people have been able to hide, and many have abused the system in terms of this ability to hide. So courts across the UK are genuinely open for business. Okay, so there's things going on in there. There are the writs, the county court summonses, default notices are being issued, statutory demands are starting to come out, and they're all hitting the mat. We had a client the other day who got literally a mat full of this after their IVA failed, and everybody's ready to go. That said, the courts, we're finding, are struggling to keep up. We saw it during the pandemic. They dived in and out of cases. It was quite hard for our legal friends, especially barristers, on WebEx to work out what was going on in rooms. And the courts, we're hearing all the time, they're busy. So consequently, there's a mindset that needs to be broken there, because these need to be dealt with. And there is a huge backlog in terms of what's going on here. So the pent-up fury comes from two sides, as we see it. Our legal friends were involved in debt collection and litigation because they're itching to go. They have clients who have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of debts to recover, and it's all been on hold. So there's literally files piling up everywhere, ready to go. And insolvency practitioners, because insolvency practitioners are basically, there's not been a lot of insolvency going on, and again, they've been frustrated in their efforts in many instances because the court processes have been denied. And also you've got the situation where clients have been able to hide and avail of a lot of the protections that were going on in terms of Rishi's work, which was commendable in its way. Again, we're into the practicalities here, which leads me to again comment that I think Q1 and Q2 of next year are going to be carnage. It's people say, and I've apologised many times, and I've said, right, when we say this is going on, they go, cool, you're going to be very busy then. And for months I apologise, because you don't want anything to go wrong. Things go wrong in business anyway, so we're okay in terms of what we do. But we don't want carnage, but it's coming. And that's what this is. This is to give the backdrop. Again, I repeat myself, not in a negative way, it's happening. In September, we got 140 inquiries. 140. And we're a small outfit. We do what we do, and we're fairly niche. So we take a little bit of finding as well. So it's you know, and that's not going to go down. And again, it gives me no pride and joy to say that. Good for business, but in terms of we don't want people to struggle, we don't want people to suffer, and suffering they are. And we've also then got the many different moving parts, and what the creditors' needs are, and agendas, which I referred to earlier, and their timetables. So our friends at HMRC keep coming, but they're usually relatively slow. And we'll come back in a bit more specifics on that. The same with our dear business rates people. Trade creditors can usually be worked with, hopefully, if a business is going to pull through. But any one of these can go wrong. And I say the real worry is some of these platforms and some of their approaches to things, because there's not a great deal of discussion, and very often it's straight into litigation. The major peer-to-peer platform, and I don't care if they pick this up, their only approach is to issue a county court summons, no discussion. As soon as, if we don't adhere to their demands in terms of giving a charge to support the guarantee, it's straight into court. And with respect, they should know better. But don't get me started on that one. Different day's work. So lots coming down the track, whatever way we want to look at it, and it's difficult. It's difficult to deal with. And if you're an SME with debt pressures on, it's really, really tough because you just don't know where this is going to go. You've tried to do the right thing. I'm going to refer to Bibbles in a minute, but you took a Bibbles on the basis that after lockdown 1, there was going to be a bounce back. Obviously, we went to lockdown 2, and then ready last Christmas, this time last year, lockdown 3, and the new year started the way it did. So it's, so you could have taken them, say you're on your Bibbles and you took your 50 grand, and then you had to increase that to Civils to get through, and then you end up absolutely laden with debt. So it's, again, very tricky for SMEs, especially those that are struggling now. I thought we'd just give a little commentary as well on our findings with the revenue, the rates, and I put other taxes there, but really we push that all into the revenue because they're at the moment, I've put there, they're very patient and considerate, and they're actually remarkably civil at the minute. And that will be, I assume, on the backdrop that the Treasury have said, like, hold fire, give everybody a bit of breathing room here. But we're already starting to see the stronger letters come out. Everybody's had their time. Everybody's had their time to get their act together, and you're just starting to see the field officers landing at doors, trying to impose walk-in possession orders, starting to say contact these people. So they're coming back out there. What is a good sign, but I think it's a very short window, is there are long-term arrangements are available. We recently helped a client there in London who over the time had, I don't know, whatever, he's got 20 odd employees, but he ran up his PAY during COVID, not deliberately, just didn't have the cash flow. He ran up about, I think he owes about 400,000. And we got on with the revenue, a little bit of to-in and fro-in, sometimes not the most efficient side of things on their part. Long story short, we're going to repay that over 36 months. But I don't think those sort of options are going to be there for long. And their patience will wane. The revenue are getting, we're going to touch there briefly on the Finance Act 2020. They're getting a little bit more statute to support them to weed out the serial offenders, and that's going to come into play a bit. And one big concern I have, and it's a personal comment, is that operationally I'm not sure they can deal with everything that's being thrown at them. We're working from home, they are working from home very often. Doesn't work, does not work. There's going to be a lot of work here for the revenue, and at the minute it doesn't seem to hang together. Well, we know it doesn't hang together. We can bring two different people in the revenue, get two different answers, so it's not right at the minute. And operationally, again, not a political statement, working from home was good. Working from home could be handy. It doesn't work 100%. And if I upset any of my civil servant friends, get yourselves back to work. It doesn't work. So I think there's a capacity problem with the revenue, and where I think it was something in the Sunday Times this week, a slightly moaning section, as you often get in the money section there, but a number of the horror stories where they just can't get hold of the revenue, and it just doesn't work. So cool, I think they're coming down the track, but again, it's where that slots into that timetable. I think the Bibble Civil stuff could take up to 4 years to pan out. The peer-to-peer stuff's quite aggressive, as could be trade creditors. The revenue is going to take a little time to wash through, but as ever, they just keep coming. And on that, you'd nearly follow along the same sort of line with the business rates particularly. They've done a brilliant job, I think, in terms of, as have the revenue. I never thought the furlough scheme would work as successfully and smoothly as it did. Some of the banks performed well with the Civils and Bibbles loans, others didn't. The councils in the main, where they could, have shoveled out Rishi's cash there and been pretty successful. What we're finding is, if there was an old rates bill, as I've called it there, pre-COVID, the end of 2019, suddenly we'll start seeing red letter demands come out. But again, I'll go back, working from home, can they cope? They've got another level of admin, if you like, in terms of what they've just given out, in terms of the local grants, etc. And so working from home again, guys, get back to work, it'll work a lot better. But again, the two together will come inexorably down the track and at some point get you. One thing I would have liked to have seen from Rishi is some sort of commerciality, though, in terms of where the rates and the revenue are. They stick rigidly to if there's going to be any consideration or debt forgiveness, if you like, it has to always go through a formal route. And as I've on many times reminded members of the HMRC, you are there to make sure you maximise a recovery for the Exchequer. But that doesn't matter. If it doesn't go down that route, tough, we don't care. But you'll get less, you could get more from this way, we don't care. That isn't the way we do things, we just follow the route here. So a little bit about tax revenue. They are doing long-term arrangements, so if you need any heads up on that, give us a shout and we'll tell you what our experience is. So then a brief touch onto a couple of bits of statute, and as I say, lockdowns allowed them to project slightly where the gaps are and the weaknesses are in the system. As in this piece of statute, it's come through a little bit quicker, taken a while to get together, and there's this and the CIGA, as you call it there, the Corporate Insolvency Governance Act. They're there to stop a few gaps here. And this was something I picked up in the R3 magazine the other week, the organisation for the insolvency industry, who reported on joint and several notices which may be issued for repeat offenders. And we recently issued a blog on this. And basically, quite rightly, they're looking at the repeat offenders, the guys that run up debt in a company, run off of Phoenix and off they go, and actually call it, I think in the revenue paper that's online, Phoenixism, right, which is a great word. So we know the sort of people that the way they carry on. Like, Phoenixes are there for a reason. If a company gets taken out, there's little or nothing they can do, but they need to start again. And it's there are some guidelines in this, but there's nothing definitive. Also, in a slightly threatening way, so the joint and several notices will be if you've popped from company to company to company and the revenue catch up with you and they say, right, see that £100,000 you're trying to leave with that company, or you set up the new business, we're going to give you a joint and several notice, you're responsible for it, as is your new company. A weird form of 2P, if you like. Take the employees, but here's a bit of debt with you as well. And new directors, you're in it as well. So I think it's a necessary provision, but it just needs a little bit of tightening. I think there'll be a few cases, as there have been with the official receiver, there'll be a few people where they're going to show right, and they're going to be hauled through the streets and seen for what they are, etc. You know, shaming people into submission here. The one thing that was slightly worrying on the back of it, as a general measure, we find when a company goes into liquidation, if the directors conduct themselves properly and not run up too big a bill, typically past not more than 6 months old, then the directors are okay in terms of directors' disqualification. In this thing with joint and several notices, the paper refers to, and if anyone knows more specific and I've missed it, please do correct me, ping me an email, whatever you want to do. But it refers to as well non-payment cases, and that's a bit of an open envelope there. So we're just going to keep an eye on that. And again, there'll be early victims. They're going to look to make an example of a few people here. We've also got under the Finance Act 2020, where the HMRC, in terms of liquidations and insolvency, are going to become, I think the phrase is secondary preferred creditors. So once all the fixed charges are dealt with, then it's the HMRC. So that's coming back into play. So basically that means trade creditors and the like, you've got little or no chance of getting any recovery because the revenue are going to get preferred. That what used to be the case, and it came back off, but they've decided over a bit of time here. It's been R3 have sort of fought this for quite a while, and it's back in play now. I see this as a sort of death knell to CVAs, because you're going to find situations where there's going to be little or no recovery for the unsecured creditors, and HMRC are going to be mopping up first. So, you know, obviously CVAs you're not paying back most likely as much as you owe, so very, very tricky there. Never been a great fan of CVAs anyway, but apparently they're quite good for fees. So a bit cynical, but that's the way it is. So there's a couple of bits going on there, and then the other one, which primarily dealt with the loophole that were dissolutions, is the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act. This, I think, primarily is put in place so that people didn't take the Sybil's and Bibbles money and just dissolve the company. Now, this is a strange one because it also needs everybody to pay attention here. And this was put in to assist during lockdowns, okay? So it just said basically, okay, so the courts are closed, don't start dumping companies, dissolving companies, right? And obviously we've got the backdrop of Companies House goes through the process of dissolving a company when directors and the like don't file their accounts and all the other statutory instruments that they have to. So that kept that door closed, as it were. Now, this is again similar to the Finance Act, is to weed out typically repeat offenders who know this ruse, if you like, and use it to dissolve companies. Now, with the Sybil's and Bibbles, what we're finding is there's only one bank who seems to be keeping an eye on what's going on at Companies House, because Companies House is still going through the process. Starling Bank, more power to their elbow, are going nuts, quite rightly, if they've given a Bibbles or Sybil's loan and they find out that it's being ready for strike off. I haven't seen another bank, and if anybody has, correct me again please, that does stand up and say, right, you're not dissolving that company, they owe us 50 grand for the Bibbles loan. The revenue is still doing their bit, but it was quite refreshing the way that Starling kept an eye on the game and basically said no, or you repay it now. And they've come all guns blazing, more power to their elbow. On a slight different point, yesterday I was reading the lady, I can't remember her name, who runs Starling Bank. She is looking to overtake Barclays, and I think she said in about 3 years' time, so they're really going at it. Something to keep an eye on, Starling Bank. Quick bit before we finish here, just on Sybil's and Bibbles. Obviously, as we said there, you've got the thing where companies have sort of hocked themselves in debt, necessarily so, to give themselves a bit of fat and or help them through the lockdowns. And we did a previous webinar where we talked about the bounce backs. So the bounce backs were given in terms of lockdown one will all soon be back for the right reasons and everything else. What we do find, our dear legal friends are always looking for work. There's one firm of solicitors where they're looking to, I think they're actually suing Boris, and that these loans were missold. And okay, so whatever's going on there, I'm not going to comment on the litigation. I just don't like when they start doing these things, solicitors, when they try and create work, but they're going on, it was missold. So the worst crime, to my mind, is some of the levels of due diligence that went on there. And we know there are huge figures in terms of the fraud, and there are cases now going before the official receiver. And again, they're making early examples of people who have been at their work and schemed and scammed the system. So we have that backdrop, but it's, they weren't really fit for purpose because they should have been continual bounce backs, bounce back 2, bounce back 3 sort of thing. So it would have gone on like that. Now, in terms of Sybil's and Bibbles, Rishi is doing his hardest, not a political statement, to extend out as far as we can, offering 10 years and everything else, but we're still burdening businesses with extra debt they possibly needed but couldn't get, but now have got it, if you know what I mean. It's a case of anybody, and I've seen how some people have got Bibbles and Sybil's loans, I never know. People in IVAs, people who literally the business hasn't traded for over a year. Businesses, literally in and out of directors' loan accounts. It's all going on. That will pan it through. There was an article in the Sunday Times, and I forgot the name of the solicitors, but they reported somebody got a 50 grand Bibbles loan, and they put it through their business and paid off their drug dealer 25 grand they owed and pre-purchased another 50 grand. Some have it 50 grand, but it's all going on. So there's that all to unravel. And as I said, I think that's going to be 4 or 5 years. And the reason I'd say that is I took a little bit of time on last week when we were preparing for this, and I went onto the government website to get their stats. And here are the stats. 2.1 Bibble loans, 2.1 million Bibble loans were given, total in value 48 million, and that's at the end of May. Sybil's, 251,000 Sybil's, 26.4 billion pounds advanced. Up to the 250 level in terms of Bibbles, there are provisions where you don't have to give a guarantee. The large Sybil's, the EasyJets of the world, and any other businesses that needed government support, took 5.6 billion, and there were 1,152 of those. The headline figure is the 75 billion and 2.4 million loans out there. A lot of them, the vast majority of them, will be honoured and been used in the right way. There will be some that have been abused. There are some that were taken, but there was no chance that business was going to survive. And that's obviously where we concentrate our work, thus the commentary. So, unfortunately, as I say, this is going to run and run. I'm going to again say and repeat myself, this isn't a negative delivery in terms of what we're doing here. What it's about, we're just relaying what we find, what we say to our clients, what our clients are saying to us. And we think we're quite well qualified to do that in light of the nature and the type of the inquiries. So I'm not going to go on and on. It's just an update. We're all busy people. I've got a voice that can grate cheese. So I'm just going to leave you with, there's my contact details. Genuinely, if anyone's got especially if I've got anything wrong on it, right, just email saying you're talking rubbish and I'll relay it to whoever was here. And any queries, any concerns or anything else that come out of this, email me on that email address if you would please. And we will look at it, and if we can help somebody, give them advice from this, we will do, and there's no charge for that. If something develops from that, then cool, we'll work out something commercial. But it's genuinely there to impart the bit of knowledge we have and our findings, and there's our beautiful website that our marketeers look after. So I'm going to end it there. We'll get on with our lives and speak to you soon. Thanks for your time. Bye now.